Well, greetings to you all. It's wonderful to be with you again. In our first reflection, we spoke about leadership not as a title, but as a vocation. We spoke about the ways Christ exercises power, not through domination, but through presence and service. So today, I want to build on that foundation and move us into something very practical. This video is titled Leadership and Complexity, Skills, Discernment, Vows, and Shared Responsibility. And so leadership is not only spiritual, it is structural, and it's psychological, and it's relational. And it unfolds inside complex systems. If we do not understand complexity, we will try to solve today's realities with yesterday's tools. And I'll be exploring what complexity is in this video. I want to start with the notion that leadership functions within a system. An organizational system is a living network of people, roles, relationships, structures, and processes that work together to fulfill a shared mission. It is not simply an organizational chart or a set of policies. It includes formal elements such as governance structures, budgets, strategic plans, and reporting lines, as well as informal dynamics like culture, communication habits, trust levels, and shared history. In a system, no part functions independently. Decisions in one area influence another. A financial shift affects ministry priorities. A leadership change could influence morale. A communication breakdown can ripple into conflict. Because the parts are interdependent, organizations must be understood relationally rather than mechanically. Healthy organizational systems pay attention to patterns over time, not just isolated events. They ask not only what happened, but also how are we interacting? When leaders understand the organization as a system, they move beyond blame and begin strengthening connections, clarity, and shared responsibility across the body. Every congregation is a system. When we speak about a system, we're not talking about machinery like a car. We're talking about a living reality. A living system is a network of relationships that affect one another. In religious life, a system includes community life, governance structures, shared prayer, financial realities, ministry commitments, generational differences, and institutional memory. It also includes communication habits. Most importantly, a living system is defined by interdependency. In a living system, nothing exists in isolation. If one part shifts, the other part adjusts. If one community experiences strain, the wider congregation feels it. If one ministry closes, identity questions surface elsewhere. If anxiety rises in one area, it spreads quietly through conversation. Living systems are relational by nature. So St. Paul's image of the body in 1 Corinthians 12 captures this beautifully. If one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. This is not only spiritual language, it is a systemic reality. Interdependency means that no decision affects only one person, that no conflict remains private for long, and no strength belongs to one individual alone. In a living system, health depends on connection. Isolation weakens, whereas communication strengthens and transparency stabilizes. When we understand interdependency, we become more attentive, not only to what's happening, but to how it ripples through the whole. Living systems are dynamic. They adapt, yet they resist change. They seek equilibrium. And because they're relational, they require attentiveness to patterns, not just events. Understanding this helps us move from blaming individuals to noticing connections. So, in a living system, the question is not simply who's at fault. The deeper question is what is happening among us? That awareness alone changes how a community grows. I want to share with you a system dynamic called wicked problems. Now, a wicked problem is not morally wicked. Rather, it's a way of saying we're experiencing a complex problem. So we use the idea of wicked in a playful sense. These are problems where there is no single correct answer, that different groups see the issue differently, and every solution creates new consequences. The problem cannot be fully solved. Rather, it can be only managed wisely. So, religious life today faces many wicked problems. Some examples include an aging membership, with increasing care cost, property decisions tied to emotional and spiritual memory, balancing institutional sustainability with fidelity to charism, responding to social justice issues while maintaining unity, and integrating new members into long established cultures. There is no perfect answer to these questions or these dilemmas. And for most, the lack of clarity is deeply uncomfortable. Many leaders were formed to believe that strong leadership means having the right answer. With these wicked or complex problems, leadership means something very different. It means holding tension, listening to competing values, making the best decision possible with limited certainty, communicating transparently, and adjusting when needed. We cannot eliminate complexity. You can only lead faithfully within it. So there are three leadership approaches I want to just mention. Most of us are accustomed to transactional leadership, which provides order. Then there's transformational leadership, which provides direction and vision, and both are necessary. However, this idea of complex problems requires something more. And I think this is where incarnational leadership comes into the picture, especially for women religious. Transformational leadership can still revolve around one strong personality. And if the leader leaves, the vision may weaken. However, incarnational leadership is about a collective transformation of the entire body. And it is about kenosis, the self-emptying that carries a leader from the center to the periphery. Incarnational leadership is developing a distribution of power, influence, and voice. We need leaders who can tolerate ambiguity without rushing to premature certainty. We need leaders who understand that clarity is not the same as control. And we need leaders who can say, this is what we know. This is what we don't know. This is why we're deciding this way. And we will continue to evaluate. This kind of leadership builds trust. It brings others into the discernment and decision-making process, and it creates space for the spirit to work among the body. So imagine this: a leadership team is meeting to decide the future of a long-standing sponsored ministry. Financial data shows strain. The sisters who founded it feel deep attachment. Younger members or newer members are questioning sustainability. A transactional leader will analyze the numbers, which is needed. Transformational leadership will speak of future direction. An incarnational leader will do both, but they'll also ask, who has carried the emotional weight of this ministry? What grief is present? What fear is not being spoken? Who has not yet spoken in this room? It will slow the conversation enough to allow truth to surface. It will not rush towards efficiency if efficiency silences dignity. And when a decision is made, incarnational leadership explains not only what was decided, but why and how voices were weighed. I want to explain something that's important when we look at understanding leadership, and it's the difference between hard skills and soft skills. We usually don't talk about having hard skills or soft skills. In general, hard skills are technical and measurable abilities. So they include things like financial literacy, strategic planning, governance knowledge, policy development, budgeting, legal awareness, and organizational design. Hard skills answer the question, can we manage the work responsibly and effectively? And we gain these skills often through education, certificate programs, gaining knowledge. Okay? Soft skills, by contrast, are relational and behavioral capacities. They include emotional regulation, listening, conflict navigation, clear communication, boundary setting, cultural awareness, and the ability to build trust. Soft skills answer the question, can we work together in a way that strengthens the community? So hard skills keep an institution functioning. Soft skills determine whether people flourish within it. Both are necessary, but in complex systems, soft skills often determine whether hard decisions are received with trust or resistance. So let's review some of these soft skills in more depth. So the first is emotional regulation. This does not mean suppressing emotion. It means not reacting impulsively, not escalating tension, and not personalizing disagreement. Imagine a council meeting where a sister strongly challenges a proposition or a proposal. If the leader becomes defensive, the room tightens, becomes unsafe in many ways. If the leader stays grounded and curious, the room stabilizes. There's a comfort. Emotional regulation allows the system to process difficulty without fracturing. Another soft skill is deep listening. We often listen, waiting to respond. We're rehearsing in our mind what we want to say. That's not what deep listening is. Deep listening means listening for the meaning beneath the words, listening for fear beneath resistance, listening for grief beneath anger. So, an example, a sister resists closing a ministry. It could be also changing a ministry. On the surface, it sounds like disagreement about strategy. Underneath, it may be the sister's fear of losing identity, grief about aging, or anxiety about the future. If leaders address only the surface argument, the conflict continues. If leaders acknowledge the deeper layer, trust grows, even if the decision does not change. Another soft skill is conflict navigation. Now, most of us don't like conflict. Healthy systems do not avoid conflict. They manage it constructively. Conflict navigation includes naming tension early, creating structured space for disagreement, clarifying shared values, and preventing triangulation. So now triangulation happens when someone speaks to another about a problem instead of to the person involved. So if this happens, for example, the leader must gently redirect that behavior. So if a sister complains to someone in leadership about another member, that leader might say, have you spoken with her directly? I would encourage that conversation. I can support it if you need. So this strengthens the system rather than centralizing all tension in leadership. It also holds the sister accountable. Another soft skill is clear communication. In times of uncertainty, silence creates anxiety. So leaders must communicate what is decided, why it was decided, what factors were weighed, and what remains uncertain. So, clarity does not eliminate disappointment, but it does reduce speculation. So, when people understand the reasoning, they are more likely to remain engaged, even when they disagree. Another soft skill is creating psychological safety. And this means people can speak honestly without fear of humiliation or dismissal. In leadership settings, this can look like inviting input intentionally, thanking dissenting voices, avoiding sarcasm, and modeling humility. If sisters feel that disagreement will be punished, they'll withdraw. And withdrawal weakens discernment. Another element important to embracing the type of leadership needed today is collaboration. And so this soft skill, collaboration, becomes essential when there's no perfect answer. But collaboration must be defined carefully. Collaboration is not endless conversation, avoidance of decisions, or passive consensus. Collaboration means clear shared purpose, transparent information, having structured dialogue so it doesn't go on forever, defined decision authority, and shared responsibility after that decision. For example, if a congregation is discerning whether to merge ministries, leadership might provide all relevant information openly, organize structured listening sessions, identify key values guiding discernment, clarify who will make the final decision, and communicate next steps clearly. Collaboration does not remove authority. It strengthens the legitimacy of that authority. It may seem obvious for us as women religious, but I think it needs to be reinforced. Complex problems require humility. Leaders must be able to say, this decision is not perfect. It reflects our best discernment at this time. That type of response requires interior strength. In Scripture, even the early church wrestled with complex issues, such as the inclusion of Gentiles in Acts 15. There was debate, there was disagreement, and there was discernment. Leadership did not eliminate tension. Leadership guided it. In complex systems, control weakens adaptability. Having capacity strengthens it. Capacity building means mentoring others into decision-making roles, sharing knowledge rather than guarding it, developing facilitation skills within the community, and encouraging constructive challenge. The goal is not to solve everything personally. The goal is to strengthen the body so that wisdom is shared. And sometimes we need to recover wisdom that was overlooked. There are times in religious life when certain voices have been deferred to automatically, often because of role, education, or cultural dominance. And so these voices are given priority. Incarnational leadership gently asks, is wisdom concentrated in a few, or has it simply been assumed to be? For example, and these might be some of those voices that often get overlooked. An older sister who has never held formal office may carry profound relational wisdom about the congregation's founding spirit. A younger sister may see patterns that long-standing members can't see because familiarity obscures their perspective. And a sister from a different region may name blind spots that insiders of that region do not notice. Incarnational leadership makes space for these voices, not as token inclusion, but as real contributors. Leadership as a vocation, grounded in the mission of God within a complex system, means managing complexity, holding tension, communicating transparently, navigating conflict, practicing disciplined collaboration, and building resilient systems. Leadership today is not about having perfect answers. We are reminded that over-control tightens authority and withdrawal, and it avoids hard decisions. Incarnational leadership calls us to a third path, that of grounded presence. Jesus in the storm does not panic. He does not abandon the boat. He remains steady. Leadership requires interior formation. If you're reactive, the system becomes reactive. If you're defensive, the system becomes cautious. If you're grounded, the system stabilizes. And prayer is not separate from governance. Self-awareness is not separate from budgeting. And spiritual maturity shapes organizational health. Our task is not to control the future, but to strengthen the body so that together we can respond wisely to whatever unfolds. There's one more dimension of leadership that we really need to name clearly as women religious. Leadership is not separate from the vows. In fact, leadership exists to protect, interpret, and strengthen the lived meaning of the vows in changing context. And since we're all formal and informal leaders within our congregations and religious life, we are all responsible for protecting, interpreting, and strengthening the lived meanings of the vows together, collectively, as one body of discernment and wisdom. So the Code of Canon Law, specifically Code 573, reminds us that religious life is a stable form of living in which members, following Christ more closely, are consecrated by the profession of the evangelical counsels. This means poverty, chastity, and obedience are not symbolic ideals. They shape our common life. Canon law also speaks very concretely about poverty. And so I'm referencing Code 600, 619, and 635 here. It states that religious are to observe a life of simplicity and are to avoid whatever has the appearance of luxury or excessive accumulation. It further reminds us that goods are held and administered according to proper law, and that superiors exercise vigilance over the administration of goods. This is not about control. This is about stewardship and witness. But here is where leadership intersects with complexity. The vows do not exist in abstraction. They are lived in real economies, real cultures, real family systems, and real ministries. So in many African contexts, for example, economic growth, technological access, and expanding professional opportunities have changed the landscape dramatically. Sisters are highly educated, professionally engaged, and entrusted with significant institutional responsibilities. At the same time, extended family expectations can remain strong. Requests for financial support may be constant, as well as technology is no longer optional for ministry. So we have all these tensions, family, technology, standards of living, also very widely across regions. So this creates real tension around the vow of poverty. And tension does not mean failure. It means discernment is required. The church teaches that poverty is not simply lack. It is evangelical freedom. We're reminded that poverty expresses total trust in God and solidarity with the poor. It is meant to be prophetic, a sign that our security is not rooted in possession. But what does that look like concretely? Is a personal smartphone necessary for ministry? What is a reasonable level of personal spending? How are stipends handled? What financial support to family is appropriate? And what level of housing reflects dignity without excess? If these questions are not addressed communally, they become individualized. And when they become individualized, comparison and resentment can grow quietly. We must help create shared parameters, not for rigid uniformity, but rather for clarity. So, canon law, again, specifically codes 598 and 600, emphasizes that the proper law of each institute should specify how poverty is lived. This means congregations are responsible for articulating how the vow is concretely practiced in their context. This is especially important in rapidly developing societies where standards shift quickly. Without shared discernment, one sister may interpret poverty as strict austerity. Another may interpret it as professional adequacy. Another may feel torn between communal commitment and family obligation. If expectations are unclear, unity weakens. We must create structured conversations about what simplicity means in this moment, what constitutes necessity for mission, what boundaries protect witness, and how equity is maintained across local communities, regions, and ministries. This is not merely administrative, it's spiritual formation. The same applies for obedience. So back to canon law. In this, I'm referencing code 601. This describes obedience as a response to God's will mediated through legitimate superiors. But obedience is not blind submission. It presumes listening on both sides. If leaders decide without consultation, obedience becomes external compliance. If members resist all structure, obedience loses meaning. So, healthy obedience requires transparent processes, shared discernment, and clarity about final authority. Leadership must help obedience mature beyond childhood dependence and beyond individual autonomy. We are called into adult communal discernment. So, celibate chastity also requires this communal support. In contemporary society, emotional boundaries are much more complex. Digital communication blurs lines. Ministry relationships can become intense. Loneliness can be an unspoken norm for religious life. A loneliness even when we're around a lot of sisters. Celibacy is not sustained by silence. It is sustained by community, accountability, and healthy relational maturity. We must not assume that vows maintain themselves. They require ongoing and lifelong formation, conversation, and clear expectations. And here's where this connects to these wicked problems, or these complex problems. There is no single universal formula for living poverty today. There is no single cultural template for obedience. And there is no automatic protection for celibacy. These realities must be revisited again and again, not because the vows are weakening, but because contexts are changing. We must have the courage to ask, are our current practices aligned with our charism? Are they equitable across members? Are they sustainable? Do they reflect evangelical witness? And do they strengthen or weaken communion? So Pope Francis has often reminded consecrated persons that the vows are not museum pieces. They are living commitments. They must be lived prophetically, not nostalgically. In rapidly developing contexts, this means resisting two temptations. The first is the temptation to cling rigidly to past expressions without adaptation. And the second is the temptation to gradually absorb unexamined cultural norms that erode witness. So leadership stands in that tension. And this is where collaboration becomes essential. Parameters on poverty, especially in context where economic disparities are significant, should not be decided privately or informally. They should be discerned in common through chapters, through council reflection, through transparent financial reporting. through formation programs, and through ongoing evaluation. Because how we relate to money, power, property, and personal autonomy is not secondary. It reveals what we truly believe. The vows form personal capacity. If a sister has never been invited to examine her relationship to security, status, or independence, we must provide that formation. So a sister needs to be invited to examine her relationship to security, status, and independence. If a congregation has never clarified expectations about family financial support, technology use, or personal spending, leadership must initiate that conversation. And this is not about control. Rather, it's to protect integrity. Religious life is prophetic, not because it's perfect, but because it strives for coherence. Leadership, therefore, is not only about managing ministries or resolving conflict, it's about safeguarding the integrity of consecrated life in real conditions. It is about helping each sister grow in freedom. It's about ensuring the way we live poverty, obedience, and chastity strengthens the body rather than creating quiet fractures. And that work requires a few things: clarity, humility, transparency, courage, and a deep trust in the Spirit who continues to guide the church in every context. So, in closing, I offer an invitation for you and for me, and for all women religious. Let us not be afraid to look carefully at how we're living. Let's not assume that past clarity automatically fits the present moment. We are not called to perfection. We are called to integrity. And integrity grows when we reflect honestly, discern communally, and act courageously. It grows when we're willing to examine our assumptions, clarify our parameters, and align our structures with our consecration. So may we choose courage over comfort, and may we strengthen the body entrusted to us, and may we live our vows, the way we live our vows in this time and in this context reflect coherence, freedom, and a deep trust in the Spirit who continues to guide us forward. And sisters, blessing on your journey.